Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Wyatt Claypool Show. And we have a lot to talk about today in regards to the BC provincial election. New polls, old polls. I want to go over the debate again because I think I was proven very correct about how the average voter was actually going to react to each of the leaders' performances, as well as I just want to talk about the general direction of this provincial election. But before I get into this, I want to remind you all to like this video, subscribe, comment if you notice anything that you want to comment about, because I actually do read the comments. I always mention this stuff way at the end of the video, so excuse me if I mention it now, because I am terrible at self promotion. Anyways, before I get into talking about the leaders debate, because I think it reflects why we're seeing a big poll bounce for the BC Conservatives, I want to talk about one old poll. I had a lot of people on social media, as well as in the comments of past videos I've made, asking me about the Leger poll. The problem with this Leger poll and why I didn't talk about it is not because it was bad for the Conservatives. I will talk about polls that are bad for the Conservatives, just as I have in the past. The reason I have not commented on this Leger poll other than on social media just to say that I don't think it's a good poll is, like I just said there, it's not a good poll. Leger does put out good polls, but the problem with online polls, it's a lot of people voluntarily taking the poll. When I say voluntarily, it's not like there's a portal on Twitter where you can go and take it yourself. Like, you can't target yourself towards this poll. But Ledger uses an online like panel where they randomly serve up to the polls to people who are willing to just take surveys online. And those tend to skew very young because you get gift cards for filling out the polls. And that's not bad. You need to offer some incentives so people are actually willing to do product surveys and whatnot. The problem with the Leger poll and why I don't take it as a serious measure of how this election is going to go in British Columbia is women under 35, as Chris from the Great Canadian Bagel podcast pointed out to me, were severely oversampled. You can't oversample any demographic group if you know through decades of past elections they don't vote in large numbers compared to other groups. In this poll sample, and women under 35 tend to lean heavily toward the BC NDP, just as middle-aged men lean very heavily towards the Conservative Party. And so this demographic group, women under 35, were like almost double what they should usually be in any turnout model. That you assume that people under 35, because they don't vote that much, should be about 20 to 25% of the electorate. And in this poll, it was like women under 35 were like 20% themselves. So naturally, it pushed up the BC NDP. And if you looked at some of the other numbers, the Conservatives were doing well in regions they usually aren't doing as well, and the NDP was doing worse in regions that they usually do well in. It was very strange. Like, the BC NDP were up in the rest of BC, not winning, but they were doing oddly well in rural BC. They were doing well in Vancouver Island. Then Metro Vancouver was more of a fight. That's a bad poll. That's why I'm not talking about it. I'll talk about polls that are bad numbers for the Conservatives if it's realistic numbers. There's been other polls that came out where they had nobody polled under the age of 50, basically. We didn't talk about those because they were just crap polls. There's no point in talking about crap polls because it's bad information. Anyways, now I want to talk again about the leaders debate. Why you talked about the leaders debate yesterday. Yes, sorry if I was rambly. I finally got my mic working properly now, so it doesn't sound like you're listening to me through a fast food speaker. But I want to talk about the debate again, not to go over it, but to talk about the media's reactions and why I think the media is so out of touch with the average voter. Because I was one of the very few people, even on the more center right media, or more center right to right media, like online media, who thought that John Rusted did a really good job. Every single leader, when they go into a debate, has a different goal than the other leaders. John Rusted had to come off like the steady professional man who is speaking to the issues that you care about, who's ready to be premier. That is what he had to do. Frankly, he had the same job that Danielle Smith in 2023 had. Danielle Smith's a very outspoken person on the radio, in the media, and so she had to show that I can be buttoned down and professional. And she did that and not looked like a fool because for a week she'd been playing up that Danielle Smith is erratic and extreme. Same thing with David Eby. He has been playing up that Rusted is radical and extreme and he says weird things, which doesn't describe John at all. John's a very steady individual. If anything, you could say he has a very beige personality. Not in a bad way. He just isn't a fiery person. He doesn't get emotional about things. But in that debate, he identified the issues that BC voters care about, and that's really going to connect with people who feel like the government's not listening to them. Then the legacy media thought, for some reason, that David Eby and Sonia Furstenau did well. David Eby was adolescently annoying. It was like someone's teenage son on stage debating them on whether or not they should do their homework. And David Eby thinks that homework's a big waste of time. So he's like rolling his eyes, jabbing at people. Oh, you never know which John Rusted's going to show up to a debate. Which was one of the stupidest lines of the night because John is like the most consistent person I've ever seen in my life in terms of performance. John is the same in person as he is on a podcast, as he is at a rally. And David Eby's staring at people this way, not looking at the camera, jabbing at people, pretending that he's in a position where he can criticize others was utterly ridiculous. I talked to so many people at the door and in public yesterday in Port Moody, Burquitlam, Coquitlam, Burke Mountain, Maple Ridge East. I had a big sampling of different areas around the Metro Vancouver area. Everyone thought David Eby was a pest that night. They hated him. And the media crowned like Sonia Furstenau as the winner, which is like the most typically Canadian legacy left media thing to do. Oh, the irrelevant left-wing party leader did the best. No, she didn't. She's some farmer's market communist who stumped against LNG and industrialization of the lands of British Columbia. Industrialization isn't bad. It allows us to actually afford the things that we need, be able to pay for things, generate energy, build homes. She said that she stumped against logging, LNG. She said LNG was worse than coal, which was utterly insane. But the people in the Politburo that is the legacy media in British Columbia love David Eby and Sonia Furstenau's performances because they said left-wing things. And they're so in a bubble. They think that him razzing Rusted and then saying like lefty things in response to Rusted's very like appealing, universally appealing conservative common sense policies was somehow good. It wasn't. He looked like a jerk because he was a jerk that night. He was inattentive to the audience. He wouldn't look the audience in the eye because the camera is basically the audience. He wouldn't look at them. He thought he was just smug and superior the entire time. Sonia Furstenau was sanctimonious, annoying, and nobody knew why she was there. She thinks for some reason we can run an economy on farmers market jam. It's just this kind of like small community type socialism that she offers, whereas David Eby's offering the big city bloated socialism, and then John's there saying, "How about we cut your taxes?" So that's the setup to me wanting to quickly talk about this article that reads from the Vancouver Sun. I always thought all the Sun newspapers were supposed to be a little bit more to the center right, maybe, but I guess not the Vancouver Sun. And it reads, John Rusted failed to deliver in leaders debate, now faces uphill battle. And this is written by Vaughn Palmer. And actually, this article, I don't need to read it out to you. I can just kind of give you the commentary on what happened. My mom sent me this article because she watched the debate, even though she's in Alberta, just to see what went on. What was the fuss about? She watched it. She thought Rusted was good. Yeah, he's not exactly setting the world on fire. He's not like a Winston Churchill type person in terms of speeches, but he talked about things that you cared about. He seemed reasonable. He seemed professional. David Eby is irritable, like twitchy, jumping around, pointing at people. It was bad. And she said in this article, basically it's just saying how much David Eby dunked on Rusted. Rusted looks befuddled. Sonia Furstenau was so good. Oh, she's so good. I'm a lefty and she said something left wing. Oh, she was so good. But if you go down the article later on, halfway through the article, like bottom third of the article, in golf, this is the 15th hole that they start saying that, well, Rusted had a good moment on that. And he did say this, and Eby didn't have a good response. And he did talk about this and that, and Sonia and David didn't mention it. I'm like, yeah, you talked about things that people liked. So even in the articles where they're trying to slam John Rusted, even then they still had to admit he was doing a good job. And then when you read the comments, there's so many people saying, did you guys watch a different debate than I did? Because I thought John was absolutely fine, and David was annoying to the point where I shut off the debate before it was over because he wouldn't let people talk. And when you're the premier who has a reputation for being high-handed, and in a leaders debate where you only have to respect three people, the moderator, Sonia, and John, and you couldn't do it, you're really playing to the negative stereotype about yourself. And the reason why I'm going back to this is that we, like I was detecting would happen, like I was predicting was going to happen, we are seeing a polling bump for the BC Conservatives, and it's significant. This is the Mainstreet tracking poll, which is now showing that with undecideds included, the Conservatives are currently capturing 41% of the electorate, people likely or saying that they're likely to vote, and the NDP is grabbing up 38%. 8% still undecided, 3% say another party, which could be they're voting for an independent, and also some people who are saying another party are probably also just undecided, and then Greens at 10. This is very, very good for the BC Conservatives. When you go down to regionals, the Conservatives are getting 40.9% in Vancouver, 36.2% in Vancouver Island, which is perfectly fine. That's where they want to be. That grabs them up 3 to 5 seats, very competitive. And then the rest of British Columbia, they're leading the BC NDP by 11 points. The NDP, it's really the only reason that their number is even as high as 33 is in place in ridings like Haida Gwaii. They are predicted to do very well. There's some very safe NDP seats in the rural areas, but then the rest are pretty much just blue. And what we also see, and I want to go down to this because I always find this a fascinating statistic. I'm just going to remove this from on screen. It actually slows down the scrolling. Oh, my goodness. Uh, but this is always the statistic I find interesting is how people in 2020 voted and how are they going to vote this next time. Still, we see this not recovering at all. This specific statistic right there. People who voted for John Horgan in the 2020 provincial election, only 68.4% of them are planning on voting for David Eby's BC NDP, and 16.9% are voting for the Conservatives, and you have another 7.5 leaving for the Greens. And I don't doubt that actually the people leaving for the Greens, they're really just people who are in denial that NDP policies failed, and they want to say, well, it's the NDP weren't hardcore enough. That's why they failed. The NDP and the Greens basically have the exact same platform. Anyways, then we see liberals. The Conservatives, even though they are not the Liberal Party, yes, they basically absorbed most of the Liberals' appeal. It's still not the same party and people aren't used to voting for the Conservatives. They still win more of the Liberals' 2020 vote than the NDP wins their own 2020 vote. That's absolutely pathetic. And then when we go to the Greens, the Conservatives are even grabbing up 19.6% because I guarantee you there's a lot of people who just want the Conservatives in because they hate the current government. They just want whoever the current guys are in out. Another party, actually, this would technically include BC Conservative voters from 2020 because it was a minor party back then. They're capturing 79% of people who voted for another party in 2020. That also include the Christian Heritage Party and other small regional parties. And then don't remember didn't vote, which obviously is mostly just going to be people who didn't vote. There's not that many people who can't remember who they voted for. The Conservatives are grabbing up half, 50.8% are going Conservative. And that's what the undecideds included, who are the second place. People who are undecided are the second biggest category in didn't vote. The NDP are grabbing up triflingly small bits of the didn't vote category. Right now in British Columbia, we are in a change election. And as much as the NDP wants this to be a referendum on the character of John Restad or some of his candidates, because don't you know they said something 10 years ago, even though the NDP is the party that kicked out a Jewish cabinet minister or pressured her out of their party and cabinet because she didn't hate Israel, even though they actually have legitimate hate problems they do not deal with at all, they're going to try and cast aspersions at the Conservatives. And this is not going to change the trajectory of the election. The election it's basically a referendum. Do you like David Eby and his government, and do you think they're actually going to do a better job in the next 4 years, or do you not? That is actually the only question in this election. People can try and make it about a bunch of other esoteric reasons or specific policies where maybe the NDP will look a little bit better because they're willing to put more money towards a certain project that doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of the health of the province. It's just, do you think they're doing a good job or not? You can't short circuit this election. And that's where I think that the Conservatives, even in this poll, where they're leading the NDP by more than 3%, it's a little bit less than 4, but you get my point, that they are going to win, not just because they're not going to win by 3. I guarantee, unless there is a turnout collapse and just something goes wrong, wasn't good enough GOTV, although I think that that's going fine for the Conservatives, I'm not directly involved in HQ for that party, or I don't talk to people on a daily basis. But what's going on right now that's going to help is that there's no reason to show up and vote if you voted NDP last time, but you don't like the Conservatives. Not liking the Conservatives isn't enough of a reason to show up and vote. And that's why David Eby failed so hard on the stage. He gave you no reason to think that he could be any different than the NDP over the last 7 years. He's only been premier for 2 years, and I agree he is the worst possible person to be leader, but he hasn't even been doing the Kamala Harris thing in the US of pretending that he's a fresh face. No, he just pretends that his record's actually good. You're just too stupid to notice it, which is not a great pitch to voters. Whereas John, when he's on stage identifying problems, yes, he's not speaking with like the passion of like Caesar taking power in Rome or something like that. But what the man's doing, like, or whatever the speech after Julius Caesar was stabbed to death, his famous like very fiery speeches. But the thing is, he's telling you about problems that you identify yourself on the street, and because he's doing that, you trust him. Eby and First to Know refused to acknowledge problems. Every time they started talking, Rust had started trying to talk about real issues, or the moderator would bring it up. First to Know would try and talk about climate change, and then Eby would try and talk about how the Conservatives are bad. It's not a winning narrative. It's a losing narrative because you are running on the idea that we suck, but the other guys could suck more. And we are at currently the bottom of the barrel. No doubt the Conservatives are going to be 100 times better than the NDP, but there's also zero chance they could be worse. Even if they were only a little bit better, they're still better than you guys, and I doubt it's going to be just a little bit better. Oh, anyways, that's pretty much it for me today. I think in the last 10 days, it's just going to turn out to get out the vote type campaign for both of the parties, the major parties. But I think what's actually going to end up happening is if the NDP start going too negative in these last 10 days, which I guarantee they will, they're just going to turn out even more conservative voters, because it's going to become that screw you reaction. Stop telling me I'm not allowed to vote for these people, because you guys are the ones who failed. You guys are the ones who can't deliver healthcare. You guys are the ones who ruin the economy. You guys are the ones who are making me pay more tax dollars to hire more public employees who are doing less work. We're done here. And that's basically, I think, the attitude of most BC voters. I was in for a story. It was a certain community in the riding of Port Moody Burquitlam. This is a riding that the NDP in 2020 won with like 56% of the vote. I was in fact, one of the heaviest NDP polling districts in that riding. And when I was going around house to house, I talked to people who were voting conservative. Also, by the way, a couple of you day to day stopped me and said they watched the show. Good on you guys. But I was in this one area where every single person told me, okay, yeah, I really don't like the NDP and I'm probably voting conservative, but then they would look at me and say, just letting you know, there's a lot of NDP people around this area. I'm not sure if you're wasting your time being here. There's a lot of people who are probably just going to vote NDP because they voted NDP the last 7 elections like I used to. They'd even usually point to a specific house and say, I'm pretty sure they're really NDP. They weren't saying that the person's rude. They're just thinking that person's partisan NDP. Don't waste your time. I would go to that person's door right across the street. And then that person would say, I voted NDP the last 7 elections. I'm voting conservative this time, but I'm not sure what these other people are. There are so many silent conservative flip voters out there. It's insane. This is a poll district that went 73% NDP around that point in 2020. Currently, based on my estimates of the area, it's 50-50 and the conservatives might have the edge. And I'm considering it 50-50 because of some of the no's that I get at the doors could be Green voters. It is bad out there to be an NDP door knocker, because think about it. Even if there are people out there that might like you, the people who don't like you really don't like you. Whereas with the conservatives, all you really bump into is people who are like pathologically anti-conservative. They can't tell you why. It's like the guy I told you guys about at the door the other day, where he opens the door, or maybe I didn't tell you guys this story. So here's another story. I had this guy who opened the door and he's like, oh, conservatives, blah, blah, blah. I'm not for voting for you guys. I hate your leader. And I just said, smile on my face. I'm not fake at the doors. I'm pretty like nice to people. I'm not like, smiling in space in an obnoxious way. I was just like, oh, well, what don't you like about him? I do a commentary channel. So I'm always curious about what people like and dislike about different politicians. And he says, oh, I don't have to tell you why I don't like him. And I was like, you don't have to, but I'm just asking why you don't like him. It's just out of curiosity. I just like to know people's strengths, weaknesses, stuff like that. Well, you like I don't have to, and he would just keep repeating, I don't have to answer you. At one point, he says, "Well, are you going to pay me for my opinion, for my information?" I'm like, "No, you can close the door right now. I'm just wondering, why do you hate a guy? Because if I hate a guy, I can usually name a reason." And he couldn't do it, and he got like really mad at me. Every once in a while, you got to have a door interaction like that, where somebody, frankly, is just being like stridently jerky to you as some random guy who walked up to their door, and you just kind of press their buttons very politely, and then they just go off because they don't they frankly don't have a reason for holding the opinions they do. The guy owns his home, he's doing well, so he's able to have frankly obtuse opinions about politics even though they just don't line up with reality, but he wants to feel emboldened in his liberalism that, oh, you're a bad person and I'm a good person and I hate your leader. Well, why do you hate him? Well, I don't have to tell you that. Was it a secret? What the heck? Were you guys part of the Eagles together or something like that? And there's like a big falling out. You can't talk about it because of NDAs. What the heck? Anyways, that's truly the end of this show. Again, like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. And if you want to support me, you can donate to the legal fund in the description below and pinned at the top of the comments. It's the Give, Send, Go link. We have a billionaire developer from China suing us for no reason, for defamation, and in over 2.5 years, almost 3 years, he still hasn't submitted any evidence to prove his case. He's just simply suing us for the sake of it because he didn't like that we cited reporting about him from like a year and a half ago, and he was too scared to sue those people. So he sued me at the time, and I was only 22, assuming he'd get a quick, easy, apology, and then he could pretend that anyone ever said about the guy was wrong by just bullying the 17,000th person to say something true about him. Regardless, see you guys later. Thanks for watching the show.